Our subscribers get it, with exclusive access to breaking news, briefs, reactions, opinion, and process. iPolitics. Are you up for it?
Hi, welcome back to the iPolitics Pre-Budget Podcast. Our guests are Scott Clark, former Deputy Minister of Finance, and Pete DeVries, his trusted advisor and economist. We've been looking at what to expect in the budget coming up on Tuesday, and some of the differences between the budgets of today and previously. Another big difference between this government and perhaps the Mulroney era and Chrétien era governments is the degree of consultation with the provinces. And I'm curious as to how you feel, and how you're obviously in touch with some of your former colleagues, how that has changed the whole budget making, the whole meaning of the budget process.
Well, I think anyone who's from the 90s or 80s in government at those days has the scars of federal provincial meetings. I mean, they don't go away. Those were difficult meetings to get involved in, and you never kind of liked them, but you knew that they were a central part of a federation where the role of the federal government is to give leadership, and you went to these meetings and there were discussions among provincial and federal political leaders, and there were constant meetings with the bureaucrats discussing issues. And so it was part of our life. And rarely did you move ahead on anything without having those kinds of consultations. But what you see with this government, especially just recently in the 2013 budget, which was their big initiative was the Canada Jobs Grant, and we still don't have it. And because there was no pre-consultation, no discussion, and here was the federal government simply saying, we're going to take your money to fund a federal program. So sign on. Right, well, where we are today, almost at the 2014 budget, and no one signed on yet, and that shouldn't be the case. It shouldn't have taken that long to arrive at a new program, and it wouldn't have taken that long if they had had some discussions beforehand. The same with the healthcare initiative, where Mr. Flaherty announced, to the surprise of his colleagues, by the way, we're going to cut the growth of the transfers from 6% to maybe perhaps 3%, didn't tell them, just laid it out, and then left the meeting. I don't think that's a good way to carry on federal provincial leadership, and I think the federal government has abdicated a key role and a key responsibility.
And of course the key thing right now is that the federal government is on a path for fiscal sustainability, whereas the provinces are not. And so you have a complete disconnect between what's happening at the federal level and what's happening at the provincial level. And this is the time, I believe anyway, whereby the federal government should take a more active role in designing or getting together with the province to see what steps are ahead, what we should be doing in order to have a country whereby both levels of government are sustainable. And that's going to take not just one province doing their own thing, it's going to take the whole country together doing something collectively. And we haven't seen that leadership from the Prime Minister. How often has the Prime Minister met and grouped with his provincial counterparts since coming to office?
This government has had an allergy to program spending. It's done everything it can to rein that in, using the tax system to cover some of that. But it has, at least theoretically, not had an aversion to infrastructure spending. That is something it has promised. We've heard tons about pipelines, although they can't seem to get through the regulatory red tape for that. In a few moments, could you sort of run through what goes into big infrastructure spending in a budget? Because we may see, we know they like to build things, and they like to build things across provincial boundaries in some cases. What goes into some of these this process, and do you expect we'll see any more of that?
Well, in the current budget plan, there is a lot of money that's already set aside for infrastructure programs. And there's a number of different programs that the federal government has with the provinces. There's the big major infrastructure programs, there's stuff for municipalities or communities, and there's other for highways, roads, et cetera, et cetera. The money is there, and it's stable funding, I think, now for the next 10 years. And so I don't expect to see anything in this budget, or even in future budgets, unless it's a one-off type of infrastructure spending, in order to augment that number. Now it's the matter of the provinces and the federal government to come together to see what it is they're actually going to do with this money. And those talks, I'm sure, are ongoing right now, but we haven't seen anything come out of that. And the new round of negotiations or a new round of agreements will have to be put in effect fairly soon in order to start planning and building in 2014.
Yeah.
And Scott, I'll give you the last word here on both Tuesday's potentially do-nothing budget, or housekeeping budget as we referred to it, and what you think will come next. You think the big shoe to drop is perhaps a year away?
I think I think with the 2014 budget, the ball's been punted down the road, so to speak, and there are two things that are going to happen. The government, or Mr. Flaherty really, will in the fall, at some time, October, November, release his update, as he does every year, and then you have the 2015 budget, which of course they want to declare victory. We have a surplus, and then they have already made commitments on how they will use that surplus. So everything is, if the economy works out, if we get some recovery and growth and employment growth, then Mr. Flaherty may know whether he has a surplus this year by the time his fall update comes to play, which would be very good for him leading into the 2015 budget, and who knows, maybe even an early election. If all the economic numbers come together, if all the fiscal numbers come together, then who knows what happens afterwards, but those are big ifs.
And the fall will be important, because in the fall, the public accounts for 2013-14 will come out. And as we saw last year, the deficit came in nearly $7 billion lower than he predicted in March of that year. If we see the same type of phenomena again this year, then everyone will be speculating that there will be a surplus in 2014-15. And will he be able to sort of keep that in the bottle until the following year when he wants the 2015 budget to be that real election budget? Will he have to announce a surplus earlier at that point in time rather than for 2015-16?
I think what we would like to see after the 2014 budget, those 18 months, is a really good public debate on how that surplus is going to be used. That's the key issue. The Conservatives have a particular view. We haven't heard from the Liberals. We haven't heard from the NDP. That debate has to get going. It's an interesting debate. We've all been worried about deficits. Now we should start worrying about how you use a surplus, and I can tell you it's very difficult to manage a surplus.
Great. Well, thank you, gentlemen. It's been very interesting. We'll know more on Tuesday. Please join us or come to ipolitics.ca to see our coverage on Tuesday. Scott and Pete will be there with their analysis, and so will the whole iPolitics team. So until then, thanks very much, and have a good budget.